in the 90s. And so we used to do things when the store started, but we haven't done much theater anymore because you just need a little more space, I guess, if you're really going to do theater right. We do a lot of poetry readings and, here and there author readings when they find us. But since we're not a new store, we haven't been on the author's trail for the majority of our time. But recently, with more events and being more well-known around the area, we get more authors.
Good. My oldest son is in the theater. He got his B of A at UC Boulder. And you mentioned you like Shakespeare. He's also a big Shakespeare fan. Does a Shakespeare festival every summer. Does interpretations. That's his thing as well. He also likes the Scandinavian authors, the Cherry Orchard, the Kierkegaard. No, not Kierkegaard. Skorsgaard.
Well, Strindberg and
Strindberg.
Yeah,
I think Strindberg's his favorite playwright, actually.
Sure, understandable.
Those guys are pretty deep. It's not my bag.
Yeah, you'd have to argue that Shakespeare is probably the greatest seller of all time. Maybe short of the Bible, but since he had 40 books and the Bible's only one. And so, what kind of shop do you run?
I work out of my home. Okay. I live and work. I'm by appointment, open on Saturdays, just because I like to see people. And we've been people come to town, so it's kind of cool. I have a more of a rare book motto. I try not to sell anything less than $50. And my specialty is presidents and politicians. I was a collector for 35 years, and then decided to. Nothing in the collection had that intrinsic value to me anymore. There's nothing I won't sell for a price. A lot of things I have priced so high nobody's going to buy them because I'm not ready to let them go.
It's the same thing as keeping them, right?
Yeah, exactly. And we've got a great community out here. Of course, you always see a Burger King across the street from McDonald's. Well, out here in Portland, we've got Powell's. It takes up a whole block, our largest bookstore west of the Mississippi. And of course, we have a great book culture. We've got scores of booksellers. Actually, we have the Cascade Booksellers Association for Oregon and Washington with 72 members of used and rare books. Pretty active.
Yeah, I love Portland as a book town, just to kind of bop around and find them all. It's pretty amazing.
Yeah, and many are like myself, by appointment, working out of their homes. They work out of their home out in the suburb, and they in the garage. They got a split level home, so don't really even have to have people in their house. They just set up their bookstore in their garage.
Yeah, I wonder a lot about the future of the actual open shop. Especially general used. They seem to be disappearing quicker than most, whereas the indie stores are gaining momentum a lot, and especially young women taking on this role of bookseller now.
Oh, that's exciting, isn't it?
It really is. It's amazing. But it's like I look at the used, and maybe in the antiquarian it's the same, where there's just not the next generations filling in for various reasons, and yeah.
Yeah, good for them. We certainly need some more diversity. There's plenty of gray hairs and gray beards hanging on. Of course, I mean it's a perfect retirement. For me, it's a perfect retirement job, right? I'm on Social Security, so everything is a bonus.
Sure. Yeah. Well, that's the beauty of it. And so, what were you collecting before you
stay intellectually active?
Sure. What were you collecting before you started your
presidents and politicians?
Okay, interesting.
When I started out, I wanted to collect the autograph of every president.
Wow.
I didn't realize how much a Washington or a Lincoln cost. So my goals morphed.
Sure. How many did you get in the end?
Well, I've had them all but two. I've never had a John Adams, and I've never had the last guy.
Okay.
Still looking for the John Adams, though.
Right. Yeah, the
The last guy, I'm not in a hurry.
the appeal of the Trump books was quite amazing watching the election, because they were common as anything. You could pick them up at
Oh,
any yard sale, and suddenly they're, $400 or $500 for a, 18th printing of the Art of the
I
Deal.
remember going up to the top floor of the Strand, and I said, "Hey, how come you don't have any Trump books in here?" I said, "Oh, we don't carry those up here anymore." That was probably, 7 or 8 years ago.
Sure. Wild.
Things change. What trends are you seeing? What are you seeing going on? Since you deal with a lot of eclectic things, is something beginning to emerge?
You mean like buyer trends or collecting
Yeah,
trends?
buyer trends, collecting trends.
Yeah, it's interesting. There's like, how modern firsts were talked about as, hyper modern, and it's almost getting to the point where yeah, things are very quickly becoming collectible. Like the Seuss thing was just a bizarre um reaction to something, and how and I don't think these are collectors by any means, but maybe they're the next generation of collectors that are in preserve the banned books, or I mean, Seuss sort of cut through that demographic, so I think everybody had an experience with those books and loved them for various reasons. And so when the sort of the books stopped being published, I was just fascinated at what was happening online.
Sure.
Just the frenzy of it, and of course it's died back now, but
Do you do zines? For a
yeah,
while, there zines were really hot.
and they are,
Oh,
yeah, and they still are, for sure. I have some here in a pile. I'll go through and talk about.
hey, speaking of a pile, hey, morning, Lee.
Good morning.
Morning.
I pulled these out. I don't know if you're familiar with these.
Oh, yes. Gorgeous.
Gorgeous. The Wildflowers of America have the first 15 issues.
Do
Wow.
you really? How exciting.
I don't know. It depends upon how big of a discount I give you. See how excited you can
Well,
get.
yeah.
Hey, Lee, after the show, one of these times, I'm going to get your phone number just for emergency purposes, I think.
Okay.
Let's do that later.
Okay. Okay.
In case I ever need to check in with you during the middle of the week or
Okay.
something.
Like to sell me issues of Wildflowers of America or something.
Yeah, something like that.
Something like that. The whole new bunch of things are blooming now. It's just never changes.
Every week's something new and something a little bit different out there on the back lawn, huh?
Yep. Yep. Front lawns, side lawns.
Lee, where are you located?
Calhoun, Georgia.
Okay.
And we're having a typical April, May Georgia weather. You can use the heat one day and the air conditioning the next.
Yeah,
but both days you've got a book in your hand.
Yeah, lately a paintbrush too.
Well, today we've got books in our hand. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Rare Book Cafe, the book lovers' rendezvous, where the topics are priceless and the conversation is free. The Rare Book Cafe is the only weekly live stream program on the internet entirely devoted to rare books and to the people who love them, and that's YOUU. Welcome, good morning. We're here every Saturday from 12:30 Eastern Standard Time, Eastern Daylight Time, 9:30 Pacific, 5:30 Greenwich Mean Time, and I'm sure you can figure it out wherever you are. Right now, we're being live streamed on YouTube and on Facebook, and so you can get out there and sit down with your morning cup of tea or cup of coffee and join us. And we're here for the love of books. And we want to give a shout out to you. If you're logged on to Facebook, send us a note, ask us a question, and we'll be glad to loop you into the show. Right, we are also a podcast now. You can find us on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify. We're called Rare Book Raw, RAW. Just the vocal, not the visual. You don't have to put up with this when you're listening on your podcast. This ugly mug. But you can take us with you anywhere, 7/24. So watch us live on Saturdays. Watch us recorded on YouTube or Facebook, or listen to us on your favorite podcast. With me this week, we're starting off this morning with Eddy Nix. Hey, Eddy, and Lee Lynn.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Lee's from Georgia. Eddy's from Driftless, Wisconsin. Come on, you must get kidded about that a lot. Driftless, Wisconsin.
Well, driftless is sort of a made-up term. We called our bookstore Driftless Books, but we did that 18 years ago. And since then, this term, which sort of refers to the glaciers. This is an unglaciated little part of southwest Wisconsin, a little bit of Minnesota, Iowa, and Illinois too. But the glaciers went around it, so it's very old and ancient hills. But a lot of businesses have taken on the name recently, and so you feel like an old timer in that sense.
It has something to do with the geology out there, doesn't it?
Right. The glaciers went around this area, so it didn't glaciate everything. So there's a lot of hills, whereas you go just a little east-west or so.
Lynn, Lee, what's your topic today?
Today, I'm going to talk some about a magazine for professional cartoonists called Cartoonist Profiles. These are issues from the 70s. And while other people, Eddy is nodding his head, may know all about this, I didn't. So if you do, you just don't have to listen. But I pulled out some what I thought were kind of interesting articles from each of the 6 issues that I have.
We will continue. Okay, very good. I'm sorry, I'm taking my eye off the screen here. I'm trying to get up on Facebook so I can chat with everybody. We're going to get back to you in a moment here. Eddy, Lee, we're going to see you again at the end of the show. But everybody, we are live. As I said, we do have several pre-recorded sessions. Our weekly contributor, David Hess of the Bookman Bookstore in Orange, California, will be joining us pre-recorded with things found in old books. Also pre-recorded this week, gosh, we've had so many losses in the literary world. Jerry Morris sends his heartfelt memorial to Lee Harar, who was Jerry's mentor in the world of antiquarian books and a well-known, highly respected Florida bookman. We've got also Lindsay Thompson is going to be back with us live. He's usually pre-recorded, but he's going to be with us. Lynn raises a question about instantly rare and collectible books. Kind of like what we were talking about there, Eddy, with the Dr. Seuss's. Overnight, these books just shoot to the top of the charts. And what causes those things out there? What else is on the show today? We got a few more. Once again, please leave us a message, and let's get rolling. Eddy Nix, Driftless Books, Wisconsin. Welcome back. I understand you had been on the show before, and there's a possibility you might be on again in the future.
Well, we'll see how well I do today.
What's your specialty, Eddy? If you're going to be on the show, what are you going to talk about? What rings your chimes?
Well, our specialty here at Driftless Books is generality, I guess you'd say, because we're in a 20,000 square foot warehouse. You can see the warehouse is pretty tall. We're up on the 2nd floor here, and the 1st floor is all where the store is. So we're able to take in whatever books are brought into us, which is getting rarer and rarer in the general used books realm, where stores are getting smaller and smaller because of rents. We're very lucky to have a big space, and because of that, we have a general sort of stock.
When you're with us on the show, what kind of things do you anticipate sharing? Eclecticity, just like the
I
sport?
think so. A little bit of weird, eclectic things, whether they be, as we were talking about, hyper modern things that become valuable very quickly based on certain news stories or certain celebrities, and then just the quirkier aspects of some of the 20th century stuff, like political books, more in the political protest realm, or weird metaphysics, things like that. But also Midwest literary authors and different collecting points with ephemera and magazines, sort of whatever strikes our fancy when we look into it, and whatever resonates with the viewers.
All right, pick up the one that's on the top of the pile and tell us about it.
We were talking when we started about Shakespeare, and so I thought I'd bring up a little Shakespeare. Now, this is not your normal Shakespeare thing. This is a book called The Philosophy of Shakespeare's Plays Unfolded, and it's by a woman named Delia Bacon. So this is a first edition of this. It was printed in 1857, and it was funded by Nathaniel Hawthorne, who really believed in Delia Bacon's work. Now, Delia Bacon, this is a book about her called Prodigal Puritan, Life of Delia Bacon, written by Vivian Hopkins. And this book talks about her life, and she's just an amazing woman who was one of the early, I would call her a feminist, definitely before the word feminist, definitely a suffragette, and an early talk circuit talker. So she gave speeches on general topics and was very influential in the early women's education movement, or bringing women into the professional education movement, if that was through speeches and things like that. So she was really well known on the East Coast in the transcendentalist scene. And she published this book, which was the first book to officially sort of say there's a problem with the authorship of Shakespeare, and we should look at Francis Bacon and Edward de Vere and some of these other characters as possible authors instead of the gentleman from Stratford. Later on, different people took on the cause, and this book here is an old copy of Ignatius Donnelly, his book called The Great Cryptogram. And that was sort of the end of the Baconian movement in terms of Shakespeare, where he published this huge, thick book with, basically almost insane cryptograms and things like that, where you really couldn't take it seriously anymore. He was also the governor of Minnesota, by the way, Ignatius Donnelly, and wrote some fascinating books about Atlantis and some very other weird things. And then this book came along. It's called Shakespeare Identified by J. Thomas Loney. This is the first printing of this, published by Cecil Palmer in England. And then we have the first edition in the United States that came out some years later. This came out in 1920, I believe, and it was the first time this guy, Edward de Vere, the 17th Earl of Oxford, was mentioned as a possible author candidate, and his candidacy has taken off, and so he's the sort of the most talked about authorship candidate when it comes to Shakespeare now.
What happened to the Sir Francis Bacon? What happened to the traditional perceived authors? Have their claim to the word been set aside?
Well,
by more
Bacon was the first, sort of that people glommed onto, and that was more in the 1860s and through the early 20th century. And then I think people just sort of started to realize the inconsistencies with his writing, the lack of good poetry or theater from his pen, and also that he was so busy writing basically everything else in the Elizabethan era that he probably didn't have too much time to be Shakespeare. Plus the candidacy of Edward de Vere, the 17th Earl of Oxford, they're called Oxfordians, folks who believe that. That has become super popular, and even in sort of the popular culture, there was a movie recently called Anonymous, maybe 5, 6, 7 years ago, by one of the highest regarded directors in Hollywood, mainly known for his end of the world movies like The Day Before Tomorrow. But he did this film called Anonymous, which gained a lot of traction in terms of the authorship candidacy of Edward de Vere. Plus, there's I collect this weird genre, so I think over there's about 100 books at least that have been printed in the last 50 years on the subject, including an endless amount of fictions, which it seems like everything that happens in that realm, someone gloms on and does a fiction around it. But
Nothing like a good conspiracy theory to make the ink and paper flow.
Well, and it's a conspiracy that's pretty safe too. You know, no one's going to come after you, except unless you're an English professor.
All right, what's next on your list?
Well, the Weird and the Wonderful. This is a weird book. It's a paperback. It's a 1970s paperback, but it's called Oswald, and it's by a guy named Kerry Thornley. And Kerry Thornley's an interesting character. He wrote a book in 1960 called The Idle Warriors, which was a novel, and it was based on the life of his buddy Lee Harvey Oswald, who he had served with in the military and had known for a long, long time. And he wrote this novel called and was like, this guy is such a character. I'm going to base my novel on him. Well,
talk about conspiracy theories.
Crazy conspiracy theories. So this is the book that he sort of explains to the world. Well, yeah, I published this book, and yeah, he shot Kennedy, but here's the truth about it. Now, the interesting thing about Kerry Thornley is he went on to start a religion, sort of a fake religion, called Discordia. And which I don't have time to go into, but became quite popular and is still quite popular. Certain authors like Robert Anton Wilson glommed onto it and used certain aspects of that writing in his novels and stuff.
The religion may have been fake, but I'm sure the collection basket was real.
Yeah, well, they did publish a book, and it's still in print, so you gotta say it went well. So the next thing I want to show is here's another mass market paperback called Motorcycle Mamas. And this is a sort of expose of the razor's edge of unbridled sex and savagery with women with motorcycles. So this is a really rare book. A lot of these kind of books from the 60s and 70s that deal with these things. This is from 1967. Published by Venice Books, but there's only one copy I could find this morning online. It was $100 someone had, on Abe. But there's a number of these sort of early motorcycle gang books that have incredible value and are, not easy to find, but they're the kind of books that you really could stumble upon at a really good old used bookstore or a flea market even.
Hey, Eddie, kind of a tangential question here. If you do have a fairly rare paperback, what's the best way to keep the condition? You put them in sleeves? Do you wrap them? Because you don't want them to get any worse than they already are.
Yeah, exactly. I'm not the best person to ask about that because I guess I'm too busy collecting to preserve the paperbacks right now. But I know there is Mylar that you can, easily put on the paperbacks like you do with a dust jacket. But I
just put them in a sleeve, like I put my documents, sure. 8.5 by 11 sleeve, maybe a piece of cardboard in there, because you want to preserve that value.
Yeah, I kind of like things to breathe, and since most of the collectible stuff isn't around people most of the time, I don't have to worry about it being, touched and everything so much.
Good.
Let's see what's next. Let's see. Oh yeah, terrorism. It's sort of always in the news, and this gentleman is a fascinating literary character, Bill Ayers, and he was the head, or I shouldn't say the head, but the spokesperson, one of the spokespeople. Him and his wife, Bernadette, were the spokespeople for the Weather Underground, and you'll remember from the 1960s they set off a lot of bombs around the country, including one at the Pentagon, and this copy here is signed by Bill to a local woman who spent a lot of time teaching with him. He's an educator. After he went underground and on the lam for so long, he eventually turned himself in, I believe, in the 80s or something, and was pardoned by I don't know if it was Carter or who it was, but he was pardoned, and he went on to a great career in education. He's written 4 or 5 books, I think, on education and reform in education, and he still lives in Chicago with his wife. So I would think as time goes on, his stuff will be very collectible, especially the Weather Underground related stuff, because I know that stuff like this is becoming very collectible. which is like an old 1969 broadsheet explaining why the math center in the University of Madison was bombed in 1968. That was right when I was born. I was born in Madison, and they found a bunch of the guys, but they didn't find this guy, Leo Frederick Burt, and this is the original sort of FBI poster for him, and he's been on the lam since that happened. And if he's still alive, he's probably the longest running, top 10 FBI guys that hasn't been caught from that period.
Hey, Eddie, up here in the Northwest, we've got D.B. Cooper, who jumped out of an airplane with a sack full of cash. Do you have any good D.B. Cooper books?
I don't. I know we've sold one in the past, and that's how I learned about him. Why is this book so expensive? And that's the beauty of this job is, you can go through a pile of books and learn, things that you would never, ever want to or need to learn or even have the opportunity to learn. And suddenly, a lot of crazy things. And that, that knowledge comes in handy. Like I've picked up a lot of copies of this book, which I'm sure you're familiar with. The 40 Days of Musa Dağ by Franz Werfel. And this deals with the Armenian genocide, which Biden sort of recently acknowledged publicly for the first time of any president, that happened back in the 1910s and 20s, with the Turks massacring a lot of Armenians. But that's a book that has been reprinted a lot of times, but still sort of maintains its value, I think, in both the collecting realm and in the realm of people really want to know about this story of Armenia and what happened there.
And now that Armenia's back in the news, I'm sure that one will be flying off the shelf soon too.
Yeah.
All things old or new again.
Exactly. This is. I just wanted to show you this. This is a terrible condition, but it's a weird Andre Norton sci-fi book about a Native American spaceman. And you notice like the technology down here with the radio transmission, portable. It sort of is a little imagining technology as it is. That one jumped off the shelves, and I thought I'd show you. The realm of sci-fi is incredibly fascinating, and there's one book that's been really fascinating me. I got to find it now. Well, I'll get to it in a minute. Oh, here we go. So this is a book by a guy named Donald Barr, and it's a slightly gothic interplanetary tale called Space Relations. And here's the first UK printing of that. There's also a hardcover, which I have over there, which was printed in. These were from the, I think this came out in 1973, right? And the reason Donald Barr is interesting is that he is the father of the former Attorney General William Barr. And not only that,
excuse me, was he the one that ran a public school?
Yeah.
And,
so the reason
hired Jeffrey
Epstein.
What's his name? Jeffrey Epstein as a teacher.
So the Dalton School in New York, he ran back in the 70s, right when he was publishing this. And this thing's kind of like a sex slave sci-fi book, believe it or not. And so the reason it's weird is, of course, he's the first guy to hire Jeffrey Epstein after Epstein quit college, and he hired to teach math at this very, very prestigious New York private school. So these books, when that was sort of brought out in the conspiracy realm, these books, you could find them at any sort of used bookstore for a couple bucks. They suddenly became really expensive, to the point where when Trump was in his last sort of few months, they were selling for $150 you couldn't get a copy cheaper online. Now they're down to more like $40 or $50 a piece, but you really don't see anything other cheaper than that. It's a horrible novel. I tried to read it, and it was just awful. So that.
Hey, Eddie, before you move on to your next book, I'd like to jump in here, remind everybody that you're welcome to the Rare Book Cafe. We've got Eddie Nix from Driftless Books and Music in Wisconsin. Coming up after Eddie, we're going to have Lynn Thompson joining us with a live segment, and he'll be coming in here in a few minutes. I'm going to follow that up with Lee Lynn talking about cartoons from the 70s. We've got a pre-recorded session from David Hess, Things Found in Books. I got a little note here on the side. Someone texted us. It was Sharon Foreman from Austin, Texas. And I asked her, how's the book scene down in Austin? And she said, well, she hasn't found a good one yet. So she's been going to the Goodwills and those type of stores to find books. And that's something you said earlier in the show, Eddie, that because of the pandemic, you haven't been getting as many books. But I know people have been cleaning out their homes. There have been Maria condoing their lives and downsizing. Where are all these books going?
Well, that gets into sort of the big picture topic of the ecology of used books, which I feel is about as devastated as the ecology of our planet. And what I mean by that is, you used to have a real healthy sort of ecosystem of, used bookstores in a town, new bookstores in a town, maybe a couple junk shops, and when people and libraries, and the libraries would take in the books and they'd have book sales, and the story. The books would recirculate within the community, and then that value would stay in the community. Well, now the libraries aren't really taking in as many books, and there's been a big trend to not take in so many books. A lot of the Friends of the Library associations have dwindled down to nothing, and they don't do those sales anymore. And where they do, a lot of times they'll even send all the books off to these big companies that sort of recycle them. And without getting into naming names, there's, tens, if not hundreds of millions of books that are pulped every year that really don't need to be, because that ecosystem has sort of been destroyed in the local sense. So people do whatever they can to get rid of their books. And we're really lucky that we have this big building and we can take things in. So we are taking in a lot just from that normal flux of people cleaning and moving in and out of town. But I really haven't been to a good book sale in a long, long time, at least a year and a half. So, but I do see they're starting up again.
Yeah, what we've got going on out here in Portland right now, Powell's is doing a drive-by drop-off, and rather than giving bookstore credit, they're making a donation to one of 4 charities in the area. So your book values are tabulated. You get to pick the charity you want the money to go to. But they're certainly not doing their very famous in-person book buys anymore, and many bookstores haven't. That's, I think, going to be curious to see how that shakes out in our industry over the next year as these books begin to pile up. Certainly, Goodwill has also been a beneficiary of all of this.
What was the last thing you said?
Goodwill has also been a beneficiary of all of this.
Exactly, and I'm sure most of the Goodwills are so overloaded they're sending most of their stuff off to the next place, which could be the pulp yard or whatever. The last.
All right, Eddie, we got about 10 more minutes in our segment. What else do you have?
Awesome. This is the coolest thing that I have to show you today. It is the covers of a book, which this is granite or some stone. But it's a stone cover, and it's a book called The Grave of Lost Stories by WTV. You have any idea who that might stand for?
Something Virginia. I have no idea. William Thaddeus.
William T. Volman. Yeah, a well-known author, but also did a lot of weird sort of art books, I guess you'd call them. I'm sure there's a better name, but this book in particular was published in 1993, and there was an edition with cloth boards and without this, but there was also 15 copies that were made with this as the cover, and then on the back cover is a similar one, and you'll notice the Roman numeral 2 there. That's all that's on there, and that signifies it was number 2 of 15 copies. Only 13 of which were for sale, and one of which is still available for $5,500 up on the internet. Some dealer has it. I don't have the book that goes in between these two granite pieces, and I do actually have a second one that's the cover. So if someone does have that book and they want to complete it, it wasn't just that covers. There was actually a, I guess, tin or bronze box that was made with these as the covers, from what the copy that's online is. So I would love to find a place to get rid of those, but that that was one of the one of the probably 500,000 things that were taken from serendipity books in Berkeley when Peter Howard died, and after the auctions happened, I ended up buying all the stock that was left and took a semi-truck home, and that was one of the things laying around. And it was really not until this morning that I looked it up and figured out who the heck that was. So now I can at least list it and know who it was.
Oh, great. Hey, Eddie, speaking of book art, I just want to throw in here, next week, we're going to have Suzanne Moore on the show. And she is a absolutely wonderful book artist, a great calligrapher. Join us next week, everybody, with Suzanne Moore. And we're also going to have Daniel Weinberg from the Abraham Lincoln Bookshop in Chicago, Illinois. Daniel's going to be talking about autographs, authenticity, how autographs affect the value of your book. And Suzanne Moore will be showing us some of her wonderful pieces. But right now, before Eddie leaves us, I'd like to bring in Lynn Thompson, who's coming on for the next segment. Lynn, are you there?
I am. I don't know. Have I been brought in?
Live and in living color, red, white, and blue.
Absolutely, and it's wonderful to be back. I, as some of our viewers will know, am restoring 7 acres of woods and gardens around an 1835 plantation house here in Chester, South Carolina. And about a month ago, I stumbled into a thicket of cedar brush that I decided to cut out and discovered I have a dire bronchial allergy to them.
Oh, my.
So I spent a month hacking up my lungs and unable to talk in complete sentences, which is why I've been away for a while. So it's good to be back among the living. And
oh my goodness, all that work to stay away from the COVID disease, and you get taken down by a cypress tree.
Yeah, I realized or remembered, because I have terrible allergies to begin with, that I should have worn a mask. That's the in these times.
Wear your masks, everybody. This thing ain't over yet.
Solution to everything these days.
Yeah.
But
so, Lynn, you're going to have a live segment with us today, but I wanted to transition into you and out with Eddie, because we were talking earlier about the astronomical value of books on the drop of a dime or on any particular AP story, how things can change.
Yeah, and we've talked about that on the show before. John Lithgow did a one-man show on Broadway using stories he had read as a child in an edition of Somerset Maugham stories. And all of a sudden, the book was $900 a copy, if you could find one. Keith Richards, several years ago, reminisced about a pirate book he read as a boy, and boom, they were $500 a copy. And so I was thinking just the other day, we may be seeing that again in real time over the next few weeks. And it is a new wrinkle in what I call the insta-rare book. It involves the new Philip Roth biography by a well-regarded biographer called Blake Bailey. He was a school teacher with a bent for writing, was able to transition successfully into it, did a very well-regarded biography of Richard Yates, the author, then one of John Cheever, another author, and that was nominated for a Pulitzer Prize. He won a Guggenheim Fellowship, and then he sort of hit the mother lode by finding he got along well with Philip Roth, a notoriously spiky man who had eaten his way through several previous biographers and who settled on Bailey, who was able to actually finish a 900-page doorstop of a book that Roth didn't interfere with too much when he was writing it, and that actually got published. Oddly,
Lynn, we're gonna get to that in a second. We're gonna say goodbye to Eddie here, and Eddie, what do you on this subject? You remember what happened with the bridges of Madison County when the internet
Sure,
struck?
exactly.
That's not far down the road from
No,
you, is it?
well, yeah, not really. Yeah, it is fascinating to see these things, like you say, on a dime's notice, just super move up in value, and you wonder who's like watching the news and doing those. But I really appreciate being on the show. Thank you so much.
Good, and we look forward to having you
All
back
right.
next month, Eddie.
well,
Cheers. All right, Phil
what
Roth.
makes this one interesting is I looked today and I cannot find any indications of a price spike yet. And it may be because this story is still unfolding. What happened was that April 6th, the book rolled out, got good reviews generally, although one in the Nation chided Bailey a bit for appearing to excuse Roth's legendary misogyny and ill treatment of women in his life. But overall, the reviews seem to say, well, that's part of who his subject was, and readers can make of that what they will. But within days, W.W. Norton, the publisher, announced that they were pausing distribution of the book and canceling all the media for it because claims that they viewed as credible had begun to surface in the New Orleans paper and in some other sources, accusing the author, Blake Bailey, of sexually assaulting teenage girls when he was a math teacher or a school teacher of literature in New Orleans 20 odd years ago. And the allegations included claims that he actually groomed some of these girls, kept in touch with them as they went off to college, presented himself as a mentor figure, and then forced himself upon them. What made it particularly striking was that it emerged that one of the victims contacted the president of Norton 3 years ago with an email saying, this is what happened. I think you ought to know about it, particularly given the kind of book he may be writing. And Norton did nothing with it. They said, well, she said she also sent it to his current employer and the school and to the New York Times. Apparently no one did anything with it. And then the Times themselves have evolved to where we have the Me Too movement expressing itself in ways that are still unfolding. And all of a sudden, Norton found itself having to do some severe damage control over a book that they had issued a 6-figure advance for and had done a first press run of 50,000 copies. So all of a sudden, those copies were blocked in the warehouse. A second press run for May of 10,000 copies was canceled. Within a day or so of this pause being announced, Bailey's agent dropped him. And within another couple of days, Norton announced that they weren't just pausing the book, they were withdrawing it from publication. In other words, they're just stopping selling it. And to add salt to the wound for Bailey, they said they weren't going to sell his memoir from several years ago anymore either. Now, this is an unusual thing, and it takes a little teasing out to really try and see what's going on here, because as all things become political nowadays, this has become caught up in cancel culture, which is one of those phrases that has come to mean whatever one wants it to. It's common, relatively speaking, for publishers to withdraw books when significant errors are found in them, or printing flaws, a signature pages printed upside down. And there have been, in recent years, a relatively increasing number of occasions where publishers canceled contracts with authors who became too controversial or toxic in their judgment to publish. Milo Yiannopoulos, a conservative activist, was in line to have a book published by a big New York company until he expressed some approbation for having learned sex from a priest. Woody Allen's memoir was canceled by his publisher, and Senator Josh Hawley recently had a book canceled by his publisher, although they both quickly found other publishers. And some of the conservative publishers in America are crying crocodile tears these days, anticipating a boom in books coming to them because of a perceived opening of a political divide between right and left among publishers. That, of course, is a commercial matter. It's a case of private companies deciding they did want to publish a book and now they don't. This is the first instance I can think of where a book publisher has decided that unknown or uninvestigated allegations were so heinous that they were willing to take a huge loss on the book and just withdraw it entirely, in essence, wash their hands of it. And so I'm wondering, and I'd welcome the comments of our viewers and the panel as well, whether this will just be a flash in the pan. I can't find that the book has spiked up in price. It's retailing on some of the major sites at about the bookstore price. I can't find any indication that any have been signed yet. And Norton has not said how many got into bookstores. So those are facts we don't know yet that would have a bearing on whether or not people want to try and flip the book and make a quick profit on it. But it is an unusual phenomenon that is, as I mentioned at the top, is evolving in real time. And for those of us who find interesting the backstories of books, how they came to be published or didn't, or the struggles and travails of authors in getting them out, this is just fascinating stuff. And it proves to me that the age of miracles is not yet past.
The age of miracles. Well, I think the difference in this case, as you point out, is that it's an unfolding story and it's going to go on for a couple of weeks, maybe a few months or more. Unlike when we have an author who dies, unlike when a Larry McMurtry passes away and prices spike for 2 weeks and then settle back down, or even the brouhaha over the Cat in the Hat and Dr. Seuss. It spiked and went away. This one's going to have a little bit more legs, and I think this one has a bigger chance of being more substantially changing to the publication
industry. Well, it does, because it raises, at least for me, questions about how pure does an author have to be. For example, I love Wagnerian opera, but I readily admit and recognize that Richard Wagner was a vile man. He was just an awful human being who harbored a cornucopia of biases and prejudices against all kinds of people. Lots of authors, we can all think of them, were fairly dreadful people. Somerset Maugham comes to mind, but they wrote good books. And here's a case where Bailey writes a biography of an author known for misogyny and mistreatment of women, which causes, in press reports read by alleged victims of his, to say, well, he's enabling his own behavior by validating it in this biography of a famous writer. And that boomerangs back on the author so badly that Norton essentially dropped this book without any investigation on its part. The allegation was made. They said, looks bad to us. They particularly realized they had done nothing about it for 3 years when they were first made aware of it, and they've just washed their hands of the whole thing. That is the unusual bit, and it kind of goes back to the how do we sort through the whole welter of issues that come up with a movement like Me Too, because there are so far no articulable standards for who's accountable and in what circumstances and with what degree of severity. And that's part of what I think will be fascinating, whether part of the spill-off from this episode will affect other authors in print or who are still active in their careers, but who also have reputations for being pretty terrible people.
It seems much more legitimate to me to pull a book off the publication because of the author rather than because of the author's subject. I think pulling it off because of Philip Roth's misogyny would have been categorized as censorship. Whereas when you're pulling it off because of the author himself, that's not really censorship,
No.
I don't think. It may be silence.
And that's where this begins to drift into politics, which is really going to muddy the water a bit. There's been a big uprising against Simon and Schuster over their inking a 2-book deal with Mike Pence, and virtually all their employees are up in arms about it. And there are people on all sides of the political spectrum trying to make hay out of this to support their own points of view. That's, as you say, a different thing. That's a commercial proposition. They're making a publisher can make a decision not to publish a book they contracted to publish. These are situations where there's no government involvement at all trying to impose free speech. But because everybody is suddenly an expert on Facebook about everything, and because although everything may have been said about a topic, not all have yet said it, I imagine we're going to see all this join into the big stew of political issues where everybody just gets riled up and stays riled, as we have gone from Dr. Seuss to Mr. Potato Head to this. Although this one, at least from a political angle, is interesting to me, in that none of the usual cancel culture mavens have rushed out to defend either the author, the publisher, or the book because they were all perceived as being liberal. So,
well, I will rush out and defend you any day.
Are really episodes in a new life that we live. You were talking about how we have had books spike up in price when an author dies. I remember when Elvis died and 2 women got in a fight in front of the bookstore in North Carolina. And they got in a fist fight. This was 1977, pre-internet, over getting any Elvis albums that they had in the record section. So these things have been going on, I am sure. We just know about them instantly and around the world now, and that's why
I'm sure there's
this for
PhD thesis at the University of Chicago that talks about emotional supply and demand
over the next few weeks.
Yeah, emotional supply and demand. Very good. We're glad to have you back. Are you taking medicine? Are you still taking shots? How's your health? All right. I've lost your audio. I missed that, but we'll check in with you. We're going to see you next week with a pre-recorded message, I hope.
And here we are having an awkward Jimmy Carter, Gerald Ford silence moment.
All right, you're back. You're back. One of us is having mic problems, I think. Alan, any help? All right, we're going to move on, folks. Thank you, Lynn. Lynn will be back probably with one of his pre-recorded sessions next week. Before we do go to our next session of David Hess, I got a question for you. According to Publishers Weekly, what were the best sellers 100 years ago, back in 1920? Can you name a book or an author that was at the top of the best sellers list 100 years ago? Hang around, stay tuned. We'll fill you in at the end of the show. But next, we're going to move on to one of our favorite weekly series, Things Found in Old Books by bookman David Hess of the Bookman Store in Orange, California. Always fun in finding something between the front end paper and the free front end paper. Take it away, Alan.
Hello, this is David from the Bookman in Orange, California, with my weekly segment on things found in books. And today I have 4 items that are interesting to me, but I am easily amused. And I hope they will be interesting to you. We'll start off with Penguin paperback from the 50s. Now, these Penguin paperbacks have become quite a genre in its own field. There's a lot of Penguin collectors out there. And so this is an appeal to them. Inside this book, I found this little advertisement right here. It's form your own neatly sectioned small library with the Penguin bookshelf. So there you go. You turn it over. It gives you the details. It's the Penguin bookshelf. You can hang it on the wall and put all your Penguin paperbacks in. Of course, I don't know if they anticipated about how many Penguin paperbacks were about to be created. This is in the 50s. And it's a wall model with the sizes. And it has a little order form at the bottom. One of the problems for us Americans is that it's all in England. It's for Southall, Middlesex, because Penguins are pretty much a British book. But that is a very unusual item. I think any Penguin collector would like to have it, so let me know. Item number 1. Number 2, in this old Webster's Dictionary, near the back, found a couple of things. One, which we find a lot of articles in the newspaper, or in the books, a lot of newspaper articles. And today I found this article from 1973, 72. It's by John Cameron Swayze. There's a name from the past. And it says, do we need a refresher course in courtesy? And he goes on to lament about how uncourteous we are in the 70s. I think if he waited a few decades, he'd really get a shock at the level of courtesy. And in the same book, right on the other page, I found what seems, kind of weird. It's just an application for a credit card. However, what I found interesting about it is from 1967. So I think credit cards were kind of just starting to get their feet on the ground here. It's for Shell Oil, and on the back is an application. It's unfilled out, and you just fill this out to send it in. If it says if you're is approved, then you'll get your card in 3 weeks. Now, what I found interesting, beyond just kind of looking at the nostalgia of a 1967 credit card application, is the fact that I was looking for the interest rates. How much interest is this going to cost if I get this card? And nowhere on this application does it says anything about interest rate. However, at the bottom, it says, customer agrees to pay for all purchases upon receipt of monthly statement. And reasonable charges for statements showing past due balances. So reasonable charges has turned to 21%. I thought that was pretty interesting. Oh, next on our principles of accounting, of course, in this book, I did find a business, yet another news article on accountant defense. I don't know. It's a finance article that seems to me just as boring from those days as it is now. But I found this in the back, and this is apropos to today's current time. It's income tax time. I found a 1040 U.S. individual tax return form from 1959. So it kind of looks the same. I don't know. I think it's not a whole lot of filling out for your tax return in 1959. But there it is. You know, in 59, you'd spend one evening filling this out and pay your taxes. There you go. Now, that's pretty interesting, I think. Finally, in this book, it's called The Essentials of Physics, and it was published in 1922. 1912. 1921. My apologies. I should look this up first. And up here it says Clarice Sheka, Sheka, Clarice Sheka. And I didn't really find anything in the book. I found on the book some fascinating drawings. Right there, she drew this beautiful picture, I would say from the fashion of the 20s or early 30s at least. And at the top it says the Book of Doom. But there's more. In the back, she drew another character here. She drew a sitting person here. However, the face has been torn off, unfortunately. So you got that. And then lastly, I want to share with you this little gem that she drew right there. And it says, a la Veronica Lake 1921 style. So there you go. A la Veronica Lake 1921 style. And the book has numbers of underlining and margin notes, but I couldn't find anything else drawn or written. And I'm assuming that Clarice was the artist that drew this. And I must commend Clarice. She did a wonderful job. And I'm glad to share it with the world, Clarice, in the year 2021. And so there's that. And that's it for today. And I'll be back next week. If you find anything that you'd like to share with our audience, just email me at oldbook@ebookman.com. That's oldbook, no S, oldbook@ebookman.com. And send a picture of what you found, a little blurb about it, and I will be more than happy to share it with you, the audience, at our next segment. And in the meantime, this is David from the Bookman in Orange saying thank you for tuning in, and I will see you later. Bye-bye.
Thank you, David. I'll tell you, if you are on Instagram, you need to follow Orange Man Books in Orange, California. He has such fun books and such fun T-shirts. It's always good for a giggle. Before we went into the segment, I asked a question: what books were on the bestseller list 100 years ago in 1920? And nobody should be surprised that within seconds, one of our listeners, Sharon Foreman from Austin, Texas, replied, Zane Grey. And that's absolutely correct. Zane Grey with The Mysterious Stranger was number 3 on the bestsellers list in 1920. And there's still 9 more on that list. If you think you might know who one is, send us a little note over there in the sidebar, and we'll recognize you as well. So I've only been a bookseller for about 5 or 6 years, and I have to tell you, booksellers are the best peers one could hope for. They have all been, to me, very generous with their time, very generous with their knowledge, never hesitated to answer my silly beginner level questions. And I think many of us have had a person like that somewhere in our life, inside or outside of the book business. We've recently had a passing in the book industry, Lee J. Herrera, a longtime Florida bookman, who is today going to be memorialized by one of his acolytes, Jerry Morris. Jerry with a memorial of Lee Herrera. Cue that up, Alan.
Hello, I'm Jerry Morris, and welcome to BibliaConnecting. Let me set up my PowerPoint presentation. Today, I want to honor my friend, Lee J. Herrera, who passed away with his family by his side on April 14, 2021. He was one of my mentors, helping me not just by giving advice on book collecting, but as you will see, actually guiding me in my path in the book world. Here's Lee standing in front of one of his bookcases. His three primary collections were books about Brazil, books about Chicago, and books about books. Lee was born in Evanston, Illinois on May 12, 1930. After he graduated from Rickman College, Wisconsin in 1953, he joined the National Guard and then became an artillery officer in the United States Army. During his career in the military, he served a tour in Korea, a few stateside tours, a tour in Germany, 2 tours in Vietnam, and a tour in Brazil as a military advisor. He retired as a lieutenant colonel in 1973 and then moved to Florida, where his parents lived. He went back to school, obtained his real estate license, and then went to work for Merrill Lynch. Lee bought some books at a book auction in California, and after he moved to Florida, he sold some of the books he no longer wanted to Haslam's bookstore in St. Petersburg. He happened to go back to Haslam's a few weeks later and discovered that they were selling his books for 3 times what they paid him for them. So Lee decided to become a bookseller himself. And that's how the Midnight Bookman was created. He retired from Merrill Lynch in 1998 and devoted his full attention as the Midnight Bookman. After the Florida Antiquarian Book Fair in 1983, Lee got together with about 20 other booksellers and book collectors, and they decided to form a book club. Here is their very first newsletter dated July 1st, 1983. Here are some of the names of the founding members considered for the club. And they picked the Florida Bibliophile Society. Mike Slicker was a founding member as well, and he published a book in 1983, a bibliography of Florida fiction. Lee bought a copy and had all the founding members of the Florida Bibliophile Society sign it. Lee told me about the book the last time I visited him, but he couldn't find the book right off on his bookshelves. I sent his daughter Lisa a photo of my copy of the book, and if she finds it, we'll ask if we can acquire it for the Florida Bibliophile Society archives. Here's a cartoon by a rather famous cartoonist, Stu Hernicki, along with a short bio of Lee Herrera from the June 2002 issue of the newsletter of the Florida Bibliophile Society. Let's cover the cartoon first. Lee Herrera was the editor of the Society's newsletter in the 1990s and probably in the 1980s as well. But in May 2002, someone decided that FBS members would take turns in editing the newsletter. That lasted 1 month. Lee would cut and paste articles from a wide range of sources and seemed to know what would appeal to the members of the society. He would continue editing the newsletter until 2006, when he became the treasurer during my first stint as president of the society. I will now read the short bio. What you need to know about Lee Hara, who was resuming the quarterly editor-publisher hat for the FBS newsletter. He was born too many years ago on Chicago's North Side, grew up in Situ, graduated Ripon College, Ripon, Wisconsin, 1952, commissioned second lieutenant in the U.S. Army, found a home in the Army and homesteaded for 21 years in such garden places as Korea, Germany, Brazil, and twice in Vietnam. Retired in 1973 and settled in Clearwater. Graduated St. Pete Junior College, a much better student the second time around, and obtained a real estate license. Managed an office for Merrill Lynch Realty, began selling books in the early 80s at the first Florida Book Fair. Co-chairman of the fair for 6+ years. A founding member of FBS and a past president, newsletter editor, etc. for too many years. Member of the Delaware Bibliophiles and the Caxton Club of Chicago, as well as several other special interest groups related to books and printing. Subject collections include books about books, Brazil, Chicago, England, London, and Christopher Morley. Looks for books on baseball for his wife. Lee was co-chairman of the book fair in 1988. Here's a note he sent to a dealer in Pensacola. Lee noted that Michael Jackson was on the bookseller's customer list. In 1988, Michael Jackson had been rehearsing in the Panhandle prior to beginning a national tour. Jackson had tried to purchase the skeleton of John Merritt, the Elephant Man, but was unsuccessful. The bookseller in the Panhandle gave Jackson the first edition of The Elephant Man by Sir Frederick Trevis, the physician who would introduce Merritt to London society. And no, Michael Jackson never went to the book fair that year. I mentioned earlier that Lee was guiding me in my path through the book world. I didn't join the Florida Bibliophile Society until November 2003. Lee knew that I too collected books about books, and he took an interest in me. He also knew that I collected Samuel Johnson and Association copies. And in September 2004, he gave me a copy of the latest issue of the Caxtonian, which contained other people's books, an article by a man who collected Samuel Johnson and Association copies. Only the Association copies he collected were books formerly owned by Samuel Johnson, James Boswell, and their contemporaries. Paul Ruxin was the man's name, and we were friends until the day he died in April 2016. Other People's Books was just one of the talks Ruxin had given. He wrote a book about some of his other talks. I wrote him and said that I wanted to buy a copy of his book because I would be giving talks before the Florida Bibliophile Society and could use some tips. Fast forward to the November 2005 newsletter to Points and Blurs by Lee J. Hara. I'll read it to you. Webmaster Jerry Morris has installed the text of his October meeting talk on William Togg on our site at www.floridabibliophileSociety.org. He has also posted the text of Paul Ruxin's talk on Samuel Johnson at our March 2005 meeting, as well as other Ruxin text material. There is now some very interesting reading on our website. Our computer literate members are encouraged to enter the site and participate in its activities. The forum is really underused and provides a means for our members to interrelate on bibliophilic matters. We all have questions which could be answered by other members throughout the website. Yes, The William Todd talk was the first of 5 talks I had given before the Florida Bibliophile Society. And yes, I created a website for the society. It even got Paul Ruxin to fly down to Florida and give us a talk on Samuel Johnson. On a side note, I really thought that the FBS members took Lee's words to heart, because there was a flurry of activity on the FBS website, particularly between midnight and 3 a.m. The website was open to anyone to post, no password required. But I soon discovered that someone was broadcasting porno movies on the website between midnight and 3 a.m. Lee wasn't finished preparing the way for me in the book world. In January 2008, he gave me a flyer calling for submissions for a book the Casting Club was going to publish. I submitted several association copies for consideration, actually 10 of them. And the committee selected a copy of a book formerly owned by Augustin Burrell. I attended the book launch party on March 11, 2011, and I sat at the same table as my friend, Paul Ruxin. I have Lee J. Harrah to thank for all of this. In the same Points and Blurbs article in November 2005, Lee contemplated about the disposition of books, including some of his own. Several thousand books would go to the University of Tampa around the same time as a proposed Tampa Book Art Studio was up and running. Lee had envisioned students taking classes in printing, publishing, and book design with printing presses and a ready reference library within reach. This would come to fruition in 2008 when he donated almost 2,000 books, when almost 4,000 books worth $300,000 to the University of Tampa to coincide with the opening of the Tampa Book Art Studio. He would donate an additional 2,200 books in 2014 and 2 more collections in 2018, bringing the total value of the books donated to the University of Tampa to $426,000. The Tampa Book Art Studio includes a working letterpress print shop with equipment from the 19th and early 20th century. The Book Art Studio library collections are centered on the age of letterpress printing, with a special emphasis on private and independent presses. Examples from more than 500 presses are represented. The collection now totals nearly 8,000 items, including the Lee J. Harrah collection of books about books, the J.B. Dobkin Peter Pauper Press collection, the Dobkin collection of 19th century letter writing manuals, and the Liz Feller family collections. Florida Bibliophile Society members had the pleasure of visiting the Tampa Book Art Studio in February 2017. Little did the Florida Bibliophile Society members know that at time, but that would be the last time they had the pleasure of visiting the Tampa Book Art Studio. I'll have more on that soon. In January 2017, the Florida Bibliophile Society invited students attending college in the Tampa Bay area to enter a book collecting contest. The executive committee of the Florida Bibliophile Society decided to name the contest the Lee J. Harrah Student Book Collecting Essay Contest. And then Lee decided that he would provide the $500 first prize himself each year. Here is Lee presenting the $500 check to the first contest winner, Emma Gregory, who was attending Eckerd College at the time. We had her read her winning essay at the season-ending banquet in May at Brio Tuscan Grill. Here is Autumn Howard, the winner of the contest 2018, reading her essay at the banquet. Here is Chloe Norris, the winner of the contest in 2019, receiving her award from Lee Harrah at the banquet. Both Autumn Howard and Chloe were students of USF, as was the winner of the contest in 2020, Vicky Intrikin. We had planned on Lee Harrer presenting Vicky with her award at the 2020 Florida Fabs Tour banquet at 400 Beach Restaurant in April 2020. We had invited bibliophiles from clubs across the country for the annual Fabs Tour, but the tour was canceled, and COVID canceled any other plans to have a banquet that year. We had to send Vicky her check in the mail. COVID also canceled the 2021 Lee J. Harrer book collecting contest. The Lee J. Harrer Student Book Collecting Contest wasn't the only program that Lee sponsored monetarily. In 2017, the Largo Public Library was conducting a bookmobile fundraising campaign. And in June 2017, Lee Harrer donated $5,000 for the bookmobile campaign in the Florida Bibliophile Society's name. And when the Largo Library put tribute bricks up for sale from the old Bellevue Biltmore Hotel that would be placed near the library entrance, both Lee and the Florida Bibliophile Society purchased bricks. The year 2018 marked the 35th year of the Florida Bibliophile Society. And at our meeting on September 26, 2018, we honored founding member Lee J. Harrer and recorded it in the October 2018 newsletter. Lee wasn't done donating books. In 2018, he gave his Christopher Morley and Peter Pauper Press collections to the library. And the October 2018 newsletter included an article on his Christopher Morley collection. 2019 was a busy year for the members of the Florida Bibliophile Society, who were planning the upcoming Fabs Tour to Florida in April 2020. Our visitors will get to tour the Tampa Book Art Studio and view some of the treasures of the Lee J. Harrer Books About Book collection, or so we thought. In March 2019, Lee Harrer instructed me to take the Tampa Bay Book Art Studio off of the Fabs tour list. Lee had learned that the University of Tampa was going to build a 5 or 6 story fine arts building on the very spot where the Book Art Studio was located, and that the studio only had weeks to move. Even worse, the printing presses were to go into storage because the university had no place to relocate the studio. Worse still, and we're still unable to comprehend it, apparently the University of Tampa officials do not consider printing to be a part of fine arts because there are no plans to include the Book Art Studio in the Fine Arts building. The books of the Lee J. Harrer Books About Book collection will move to the library proper. As for the Tampa Bay Book Art Studio, it is permanently closed. Lee attended our last pre-COVID holiday party in December 2019, which was recorded in the January 2020 newsletter. Lee would grace the cover of the May 2020 newsletter when our editor wanted everyone to wish Lee a happy 90th birthday. In October 2020, I received some rather disturbing news from his daughter. Lee had fallen and broken his arm and was in a rehab facility. Then 2 staff members tested positive for the coronavirus, and the rehab facility was in lockdown. Lee was spared from contracting the coronavirus, but never fully recovered from his fall. Believing he was no longer capable of living on his own, his daughter convinced him to move into a nursing home until he got better. But Lee never made it home. On April 13th, 2021, Lee had an aneurysm that had ruptured, and he died the next day. Florida Bibliophile Society members attended the memorial service on April 30th, 2021. The executive committee of the Florida Bibliophile Society is currently considering the best way to honor our founding member, Lee J. Harrah. I know what Lee Harrah would want for the University of Tampa to find a location for the Tampa Book Art Studio. But I would change the name to the Lee J. Harrah Book Art Studio. Now that would make Lee smile. Bye, Lee. And bye to everybody on BiblioConnected.
And we've all got somebody in our life that we appreciate. Let's say we make sure to say thank you to them before it's too late. All right, coming up next, Lee Lynn from Calhoun, Georgia. Hi, Lee.
Agree with you about the kind of reception that you get in the book world from colleagues. The first book fair that I did, I wound up being there by myself, was a Georgia fair, and the booth next to me was Mike Slicker, and he was accompanied by Sarah. And they were so much help in just the mechanics of getting organized and getting set up and what to do when, this kind of thing. My first book sale at that show was to Cliff Braubert from Old New York Bookshop. And Cliff and Tom Dorn have been wonderful mentors over the years, as has Mike and of course Sarah. So it is a great community of people.
I use the word collegial.
Yeah,
people,
yes.
They're so collegial. Nobody feels threatened. People don't feel like you're stealing their business.
No, they don't.
Have to keep secrets from you. Everybody is just so collegial.
It has been a really good relationship all the way around. When Alan said, "What do you want to talk about today?" I said, "Well, okay, we'll see." Cartoonist Profiles was for 36 years the leading magazine covering all aspects of professional cartooning. The editor was Judd Hurd, Hurd, who was the editor for 36 years until he died at the age of 92 in 2005. He was a major figure in the cartooning world, though you may not have heard of him because most of his cartoons were informational rather than humorous. He did one called Ticker Tunes, which was about the stock market, and health capsules, which are about health issues. He was, in 1998, awarded the National Cartoonist Society's Special Features Award for health capsules.
On the other hand, Lee, if you look at the graphic you have up, we recognize almost all of the cartoonists that are on the cover.
Of course we do. Of course we do. These 6 copies were in a mixed lot of some comic books and other graphic arts material. They're from the 70s, and they featured many, many familiar artists and comic strips. Mad Magazine appeared a lot. There were nostalgic articles on early Dick Tracy and Mickey Finn and Alley Oop. But I've selected a few articles that I thought were a little unusual, or at least unfamiliar to me. So, Alan, if you'll go to number 2. This one actually was a sentimental choice, The Family Circus by Bill Keane. In 1970, newly married, we lived across the street from Bob's parents, and his mama was addicted to the Family Circus. I worked from home part of the time and spent many lunch hours at her table listening to her read the Family Circus. And she cut out every single issue, saved it for her friend Ruth so they could share a laugh with it. It really wasn't until I had kids that I understood why they were so funny. One of these on here, right there, shows Mama with the 4 kids in a demolished looking kitchen, and the kids are saying, "You used to work before you were married, didn't you, Mommy?" But it was a favorite of my mother-in-law, and that was why I picked this one out. Go to the next one. Okay. This one is a black cartoonist named Maury Turner, and he did a strip called We Pals that was the starting point for a black and white coloring book that he published as a contribution to what was then Negro History Week, which of course is now Black History Month. He said it was not exclusively for the black child, for the pride and dignity it would give him, but mainly for the deprived suburban white child who needed to be made aware of the contributions of his black brothers. And this strip that you see here, the little white girl says she wants to be Willie Mays, and the black girl says you should be Gwendolyn Brooks instead, and goes ahead to tell her who Gwendolyn Brooks is and all of that. And so this is, you know, one of his strips, and I thought that was an interesting, you know, very interesting one. I think I have the next slide is another picture of some of his work. He did, this is from the coloring book, and he did famous African Americans. He did children talking to each other, all in a format that kids could come along and color. In, let's see, the next issue is from June of '71, and Gene Bassett was the editorial cartoonist for Scripps Howard. He did a mural in his home. This is in his house. It covered 2 walls that involved just about every political figure of his time. And we're talking about the 70s. And here we have, let's see, Secretary of State Rogers, and I'm not sure who this one is, chasing Golda Meir, saying, Golda, have we got a peace plan for you? And people would come just to see this mural. And let's see, I think I have another picture of some pages from it. One of them has Dean Rusk as I cannot read it, but this is Mao with the Great Society as the Tower of Babel. So this was on his wall in his house. You have to wonder where that might be today. Is it in some museum somewhere? Okay, let's go to the next one. This is a Canadian artist, Lynn Norris, and every year he published a book or a booklet of his cartoons from the Vancouver Sun, and they're all very Canadian oriented. But one that I really like is this one right up here. These folks are talking about the Festival Ballet, and she says, my husband says that you have to experience it. And there he is experiencing it in his polka dotted boxer shorts, about to surprise her visitors with an impromptu ballet himself. So this was, these are from the Vancouver Sun. And let's see, September '73. Now, this is a cartoon I remember very well, Red Eye, which was an Indian tribe with a not a very good chief and some strange characters and a medicine man, which the Gordon Best, the artist, said represented all doctors everywhere. A talking horse. And the people here are saying, imagine that we're going to be in the Cartoonist Profiles magazine, and the horse Loco says, they're not sticking any staples in my belly. Today, there would probably be a lot of, this ran until 2008. Today, there would probably be a lot of criticism about the depiction of Native Americans in this. But Bess said that the strip that he got the most complaints about involved hearing aids, because the gag was, some people thought was offensive to handicapped people. And his reply was he was 80% deaf in one ear, and so he didn't see anything the matter with doing it. But you know, I think it probably could have offended overweight people as well. Both the chief and his wife were rather chunky. But it did run for a long time, and it's compared to the strip Hagar the Horrible, which, if you remember, was about
Sure, of
Vikings
course.
and
Yeah.
portrayed in a very similar
Orange.
manner. Yeah, right. I loved it too. Okay, the next one, we don't want
I have to tell you, I don't read a newspaper very often anymore, but when I do, the first thing I read is the editorial cartoon, and then I go to the comics, and then I settle down with a cup of coffee and get into all the bad news.
Yeah. Well, we used to get the Atlanta Journal-Constitution delivered daily, but they stopped delivering up this way some years ago, and
No home
then
delivery?
no home delivery. No, we can get Chattanooga papers, but not Atlanta. And then they started having the Sunday paper at CVS and Walmart and a few other places. And now they do have the daily ones at those locations. But, that means you have to go out and get it before you can have it with your coffee. So that's sometimes not worth the effort. Plus, CVS takes the ads out because people come in and just take the ads with the coupons out of the papers. And so if you buy a paper, you have to ask to have the ads back if you want them. That's the way it is.
I just go in, I just take the cartoons out when I go.
Yeah, just take the cartoons. I know. And we don't want to leave out women cartoonists. There haven't been a lot of them. This woman's name is Tissa Davis, and she was Hungarian. She escaped from Hungary when Russians took over and moved to the United States. Never really mastered the English language, this article said. But these drawings are animation drawings from a 1977 movie, feature-length movie about, as you can tell, Raggedy Ann and Raggedy Andy, that actually, did open in 1977. I don't remember it, but I think in 77 I probably wasn't too interested in Raggedy Ann. But a very interesting woman. She was very active in the cartoon and animation world in Hungary before leaving there, and then made her way to England, where she got jobs in her field, which was fortunate, before moving to New York, and this was some of her work. So that is, these were interesting magazines about an industry that, in spite of the fact that it's centered on humor, is a very serious industry with extremely talented artists. And
men, African American, women, it's just very, very broad swath of the society.
And this, as I said, this magazine ran until 2005. Today, its counterpart is Comics Journal. And in 2011, Comics Journal did a really, though it was a number of years after his death, did a really nice article on Judd Hurd that you actually can pull up online, and read about him. So this is kind of out of my field, but and these issues are library issues. They're not in great shape, but they have survived, and these are from the Redwood City Public Library. Is that California?
Sounds like it to me.
Sounds like it to me. And my guess on the 100-year ago authors, maybe.
Yeah.
Let me see.
Drum roll.
Edith Wharton.
Edith Wharton.
Sinclair
Number 4,
Lewis.
The Age of Innocence.
Sinclair Lewis.
Sinclair Lewis, you are good, girl.
Beyond that, I don't think I would have thought of Zane Grey.
Bring them up, Alan. Let's see who they are. We have a list for us? Very good. I would have only gotten one.
Oh, my goodness. I did better than I thought.
Main Street, Sinclair Lewis, The Brimming Cup, Dorothy Canfield, The Mysterious Writer Zane Grey, Edith Wharton, James Oliver Curwood, Edith M. Hall, A Poor Wise Man by Mary Roberts Reinhardt, Her Father's Daughter by Jean Stratton Porter, The Sisters-in-Law by Gertrude Atherton. Wow, a lot of women on the list.
Yes, there really are.
Yeah, and Kingdom Round the Corner by Coningsby Dawson.
I don't have all those books, but I have stuff by Kerwood, stuff by Mary Roberts Reinhardt, stuff by Gene Stratton Porter.
And I bet the ones that you don't have, you probably don't have them because you sold them already.
Well, maybe, but I don't think I've had any of these titles.
All right, Lee, are you coming back next week? Are you on our schedule?
As far as I know.
Okay, we're looking forward to it. And we have a wonderful show next week, Lee. We're going to have Daniel Weinberg of the Abraham Lincoln Bookshop in Chicago. He's going to talk to us about autographs, authentication, the value of autographs in books. This came to mind to me recently because of the documentary about the forger in Salt Lake City, and I wanted to get somebody on the show. We also have book artist Suzanne Moore, who's keeping alive the dying art of calligraphy. She just does some absolutely beautiful work. Also with us next week is Mary Kay Watson. She'll be talking about a spooky murder mystery in her home state of West Virginia. All right, folks, that's all the time we have. Thank you for joining us at the Rare Book Cafe, the book lovers' rendezvous, where the topics are priceless and the conversation is free. See you next week, Lee.
All right.
Ciao, Bella.
Thank you.